king who stood at the absolute peak of his world sat alone on a grand, cold throne. He had unmatched strength, boundless wealth, and the highest status anyone could ever achieve. In his world, martial arts and personal combat decided the fate of entire nations, and he was the strongest of them all. Yet, beneath his grand crown, his life was completely empty. He had no true friends, no family, and lived in constant isolation, always fearing betrayal and assassination. When his life came to an unexpected end, he closed his eyes, expecting only the cold, quiet darkness of death. But instead of fading into nothingness, he woke up floating. He was drifting through a silent, pitch-black space. In the distance, a tiny speck of blinding white light appeared. It quickly expanded, forming a massive tunnel of light. As he was pulled closer, the brilliant glow swallowed him completely. He opened his eyes, but everything was a complete blur of warm colors and soft shapes. His vision was unfocused, and he could hear muffled, distant voices that slowly grew louder and clearer. Gentle, warm hands lifted him up and cradled him close. As his eyes slowly adjusted, he looked up at a beautiful woman. She had long, glowing auburn hair and soft, kind eyes. Tears of absolute joy streamed down her face as she smiled at him. Standing right next to her was a rugged, muscular man with messy hair and a giant, goofy smile. The baby tried to speak. He wanted to ask where he was, who these people were, and why his body felt so heavy. But instead of words, the only sound that came out of his mouth was a high-pitched cry. He looked down at his own arms and was shocked to see tiny, chubby, weak little fingers. In that exact moment, the truth hit him. He had been reborn as a helpless infant. The mother held him tightly against her chest, letting him feel her warmth. She whispered to him gently, welcoming him to the world and giving him his new name, Arthur Leywin. Over the next few weeks, Arthur lay in a simple wooden crib, trying to adapt to his new reality. Though his physical body was completely helpless and tiny, his mind was still that of a battle-hardened adult king. He spent his days observing his new environment. His new home was a modest, rustic cottage made of thick wood and rough stone. It was a massive contrast to the cold, giant stone castle he used to rule. Yet there was a profound warmth and love in this simple home that he had never experienced in his past life. His new parents, Alice and Reynolds, loved him unconditionally. One day, Arthur witnessed something extraordinary. His mother, Alice, placed her hand over a small injury on his leg while his father was playing with him. Arthur watched closely as a soft, glowing, warm light began to emanate from her palm. Within moments, the skin began to knit back together and the wound completely vanished. In his previous world, warriors utilized an inner energy called ki to strengthen their bodies and weapons. But this was completely different. This was actual, real magic. Arthur realized he had been reborn into a fantasy world governed by entirely different laws of nature. Staring at his tiny hands, Arthur made a silent promise to himself. He had been given a rare second chance at life. This time, he would not be a lonely king who lived only for power and duty. He had a family that loved him, and he would do whatever it took to master this world's magic and protect them at all costs. In his past life on Earth, the Great King was a warrior of unrivaled skill. He could summon a massive, loyal army with a simple snap of his fingers, and his master-level swordsmanship was feared by entire nations. Yet, as he looked back on all his grand victories, he could not think of a single moment that made him feel prouder than what he was doing right now. He was finally crawling. Moving his heavy, uncoordinated limbs across the carpet was a massive physical victory, and he took every single inch of progress very seriously. One afternoon, he managed to crawl into the washroom and catch a glimpse of himself in the polished metal sheet they used as a mirror. He had to admit, his new form was incredibly cute. He had inherited his mother's glowing, thick auburn hair and his father's bright azure blue eyes. Although his nickname Art sounded way too adorable for a former battle-hardened ruler, he couldn't help but accept his new, charming appearance. Until now, Arthur had been completely dependent on his parents for information. During the day, his mother, Alice, would sit by his crib and read him bedtime stories. Whenever she closed the book too early, Arthur would let out funny, annoyed baby grunts to complain, wanting to hear more about this mysterious new land. Other times, his father, Reynolds, would lift him up and sit him on his muscular lap. Reynolds was a former adventurer, a highly respected and exciting job in this world. He would proudly tell Arthur about his glory days, describing how he joined different parties to hunt dangerous beasts, explore ancient ruins, and complete missions for the Adventurers Guild. Reynolds especially loved boasting about how he met Alice. He claimed that the very second he walked into the guild hall in the border city of Valden, Alice fell head over heels in love with him. But before Reynolds could finish his romantic tale, Alice would always appear, playfully slapping him on the back of his head and telling him to stop filling their son's head with lies. It was a warm, noisy, and incredibly loving dynamic, something Arthur had never experienced in his lonely past. Arthur knew that if he wanted to master the power of this world, listening to stories wouldn't be enough. He needed real, deep knowledge. Late at night, when the entire house was pitch black and silent, Arthur put his plan into action. He carefully crawled out of his crib and made his way down the dark wooden hallway. He slipped into the family study, where the pale moonlight shone through the window. Using all his tiny strength, he managed to pull a heavy, dusty book from the bottom shelf. As he flipped through the large pages, he began to learn about the continent they lived on, which was called Dicathan. More importantly, he discovered how the magic system in this world functioned. In his past life, warriors used an inner life force called ki that was generated naturally inside their own bodies. But here, magic relied on mana, an energetic force that floated freely in the surrounding atmosphere. To use magic, a person had to draw this external mana into their body and condense it near their heart to form a mana core. The book explained that because the process required immense mental focus and physical maturity, humans normally could not form a mana core until they were at least 10 to 12 years old. But Arthur realized he had a massive secret advantage. His physical body was that of a baby, but his mind was that of an adult king who had already spent a lifetime mastering mental discipline. He didn't need to wait a decade. Determined to try, the tiny baby sat cross-legged on the floor of the dark study. He closed his eyes, cleared his mind, and entered a deep state of meditation. Slowly, he began to feel it. The tiny glowing specks of mana floating in the air around him like a cloud of silent fireflies. With precise focus, he began to guide the ambient energy inside his chest, trying to condense it into a single point. The mana began to swirl inside him, growing warmer and faster. He was on the absolute verge of a historic, magical breakthrough. But suddenly, the door swung open, and the bright light from the hallway flooded the room. Alice stood in the doorway, looking down at her baby sitting in the dark. Instead of realizing her son was a magical prodigy, she simply smiled, sniffed the air, and gasped. She scooped him up in her arms, cooing and kissing his cheeks, completely focused on changing his wet diaper. Arthur could only sigh in defeat, realizing that no matter how legendary of a king he used to be, he was still completely at the mercy of a baby's body. A small quill scratched softly against the parchment of a leather-bound diary. Alice Leywin sat at her desk, pouring her heart into the pages. She wrote about her son, Arthur, who was now almost 2 years old. To her, he was the most beautiful baby in the world, with his messy patch of auburn hair and bright azure blue eyes. But Alice noted something else. At times, Arthur's gaze held a deep, silent intelligence that made him look like a miniature adult. Alice was determined not to be a blindly doting mother. Instead, she resolved to be a strong, dependable, and strict parent who would guide her son down the right path. She noted in her journal that Arthur was fascinated by the outside world, especially the local town. Whenever they visited, his eyes would dart from merchant to merchant, taking in the sights and sounds of the bustling stalls. To encourage his curiosity, Alice decided they would make the trip downtown every other day. Yet, looking at her husband, Reynolds, she knew deep down that Arthur would likely want to follow in his footsteps and become an adventurer. Though she was proud, she couldn't help but worry about the dangers of that life. With a gentle, loving sigh, she closed her diary. Outside the study, Arthur was celebrating a massive milestone. He could finally walk. Although his tiny legs were still a bit clumsy and he occasionally wobbled, he took immense pride in no longer being confined to his crib. During their trips to the village, Arthur analyzed everything. The town was simple but lively, filled with brick roads, wooden shops, and street vendors selling exotic goods. It was his first real look at the common people of this fantasy world, and he memorized every detail. But back at home, a different kind of excitement awaited him. Arthur watched from the porch as his father, Reynolds, stepped into the grassy backyard to train. This was Arthur's first chance to witness real magic in action, and he did not want to miss a single second. Reynolds stood in the center of the yard, taking a deep, slow breath. He closed his eyes, focusing his mind. Suddenly, a soft, warm glow of mana enveloped his body. With a sharp, sudden stomp of his foot, the earth beneath him rumbled. A dozen small stones and pebbles rose from the dirt, floating weightlessly around Reynolds as if suspended in water. Rather than throwing the stones, Reynolds pulled the floating mana back into his own body. His muscles visibly tensed, and a heavy, dense aura of energy wrapped around his fists. Reynolds threw a swift punch into the open air. The sheer wind pressure from his strike was so powerful that it rustled the leaves of the trees at the far edge of the yard. Seeing his son watching with wide, sparkling eyes, Reynolds laughed and called Arthur over. He knelt down to explain the fundamentals of magic. Reynolds revealed that there were two main types of magic users in this world: augmenters and conjurers. An augmenter channels mana directly into their physical body, strengthening their muscles, bones, and senses to superhuman levels. They are deadly close combat fighters. A conjurer, on the other hand, casts their mana outward into the atmosphere, shaping it into external spells like fireballs or gusts of wind from a distance. This explanation was a massive revelation for Arthur. In his past life, Ki was used exactly like augmentation to strengthen his body for swordplay and martial arts. He realized his past experience gave him an incredible head start. He was already perfectly suited to become a master augmenter. But as he looked down at his tiny hands, Arthur's ambitious mind wondered, was it possible to master both? He resolved to push his limits and find out. Arthur was nearly 3 years old. While other children his age spent their days playing with wooden toys and learning to speak simple words, Arthur was secretly undertaking a task that should have been impossible. Every single day, he practiced his meditation. Even when he was resting in his crib or pretending to sleep, he kept his mind active. He had trained his brain to absorb mana continuously, a highly advanced technique that allowed him to gather energy even when he wasn't actively trying. However, doing this in a toddler's body was incredibly dangerous. A 3-year-old's physical form is fragile, with narrow and delicate mana channels. If too much raw energy rushed through his veins at once, it could easily paralyze or kill him. Because of this, Arthur had to be extremely careful. Using the master-level focus from his past life, he guided the raw mana through his body slowly and gently, treating it like a calm, quiet stream of water. Months of patient, exhausting work finally led to this moment. Arthur sat cross-legged on the floor of his home, entering a state of absolute concentration. In his chest, right next to his heart, a cluster of glowing mana particles had gathered. It was his developing mana core. It was so close to completion. He could feel that he was almost there. Arthur focused all his mental strength to pull the final floating specks of mana from the air around him. The tiny glowing lights drifted through the room, answering his call. He guided them carefully into his chest, coaxing them to merge with the rest of the energy. But as the final particles snapped into place, the reaction was far more violent than he had anticipated. Instead of settling quietly, the mana inside Arthur's chest began to spin rapidly. The energy formed a raging vortex, spiraling completely out of his control. Outside, Reynolds and Alice were busy with their daily routine. Suddenly, the peaceful afternoon air shattered. A heavy, terrifying pressure fell over the entire yard. It was a wave of raw, unfiltered power so intense that even Reynolds, a veteran adventurer, froze in complete shock. They both looked toward their cottage. The wooden walls were creaking and cracking under an invisible force, and the windows shook so hard they were on the verge of shattering. Alice realized with absolute horror that their baby was still inside. Her face turned pale, and she screamed Arthur's name as she ran desperately toward the shaking house. Inside, Arthur was at his absolute limit. The spinning vortex of mana in his chest reached its boiling point. He could no longer contain the pressure. With a blinding flash of golden and blue light, a massive, violent shockwave erupted from his tiny body. A deafening roar echoed through the valley as a colossal explosion tore the Leywin house completely to pieces, leaving nothing but a cloud of dust and debris. Reynolds did not hesitate for even a single second. Coughing through the ash, he sprinted directly into the burning rubble, desperately screaming his son's name. Alice followed close behind, her hands shaking and tears streaming down her face, fearing the absolute worst. But as Reynolds pushed past a fallen wooden beam, he froze in complete shock. His jaw dropped, and he stared ahead in disbelief. There, sitting perfectly safe in the middle of a small, charred crater, was tiny Arthur. He wasn't crying, and he didn't have a single scratch on him. Instead, a soft, glowing blue light was gently swirling around his small body like a protective shield. Arthur looked around at the shattered walls and the open sky, completely dazed. His first thought was that an enemy assassin from his past life had tracked him down and blasted his home. But as he looked down at his own chest, he felt a warm, powerful heartbeat. A concentrated center of energy had formed right next to his heart. He realized the truth. The massive explosion had been caused entirely by his own power. At just 3 years old, Arthur had successfully awakened his mana core. In the days following the explosion, the family began the slow process of rebuilding, and Arthur spent his time resting and studying. He wanted to understand the full extent of his new abilities. As he sat with his books, he reflected on the rules of magic in this new world. He knew that a magic user's strength was defined by the color of their mana core. When a core first forms inside a person, it is a dark, pitch-black color. This is because the raw mana particles are mixed with the body's natural blood and other physical impurities. To grow stronger, a mage has to spend years meditating to filter out these impurities. As the core becomes purer, its color slowly changes. It goes from black to red to orange to yellow to silver and finally to the legendary white core, which represents the absolute peak of magical power. Because Arthur was only 3 years old, his core was currently at the very beginning, the black stage. However, his mind was still that of an adult king who had spent an entire lifetime mastering the flow of energy. He knew exactly how to manipulate the power inside him, giving him a massive head start over anyone else in this world. One evening, Reynolds came into Arthur's room to talk to him about his future. He sat down beside his son, his face unusually serious. Reynolds explained that awakening a mana core at the age of 3 was unheard of. If the wrong people found out about Arthur's genius, it could put him and the entire family in grave danger. Reynolds and Alice wanted to protect their son, but they also knew they didn't have the resources or the knowledge to train a child with this much potential. They made a major decision. They would leave their peaceful country home and travel to Xyrus, the grand capital city of the human kingdom of Sapin. Alice Leywin was completely against the idea. To her, the suggestion of letting Arthur go to the grand floating city of Xyrus all by himself was absolute insanity. Arthur was only 3 years old. To any normal, loving mother, sending a toddler away to a massive, bustling metropolis to live with a complete stranger was a terrifying thought. Reynolds, however, argued passionately. He pointed out that Arthur's talent was a once-in-a-generation miracle. Their son was a magical genius the likes of which the continent had never seen before, and keeping him cooped up in a tiny, remote countryside village would be a disservice to his future. They had a long, emotional debate, with neither side wanting to back down. Finally, they reached a perfect compromise. If Arthur was going to Xyrus City to find a magic mentor, they would all go together. They would pack up their lives, say goodbye to their quiet home in Ashburtown, and move to the capital as a family. They immediately began preparing for the long 3-week-long journey. The trip would be physically demanding and highly dangerous, requiring them to cross vast forests and treacherous mountain paths known to be crawling with hostile beasts. Late that night, Alice walked into Arthur's room. He was sitting on his bed, deeply engrossed in a heavy, dusty book, trying to read under the dim light. Alice smiled gently, walked over, and took the book away from his tiny hands. She told him it was time to close his eyes and sleep, because they had to head out very early the next morning. She also shared a comforting detail. They wouldn't be traveling alone. The Twin Horns party, Reynolds and Alice's old adventuring comrades, would be joining them to act as their personal guards and escorts. The next morning, the sky was painted with a warm, golden sunrise, and a gentle breeze blew through the valley. The packed carriages were parked in front of the house, ready to roll. Suddenly, a group of travelers appeared on the horizon. Reynolds' eyes lit up with pure joy. He ran forward with a loud shout of excitement, throwing his arms around his old friend Adam Crench in a massive hug. Reynolds then turned back to his son and proudly told Arthur to introduce himself. Arthur stepped forward. Despite his tiny toddler body, he maintained his usual polite, calm, and formal demeanor. He bowed slightly and introduced himself as Arthur Leywin. The moment the words left his mouth, a beautiful blonde woman named Angela Rose squealed with delight. She lunges forward, scooping Arthur up into a bone-crushing, suffocatingly tight hug, squeezing him against her chest and cooing over how adorable he was. Arthur was left completely flustered, his face buried, struggling to breathe. Helen Shard, the mature leader of the party, chuckles and tells Angela to let the poor boy go before she accidentally kills him. Arthur was then introduced to each member of the legendary Twin Horns. Helen Shard was the level-headed leader of the group and a highly skilled wind attribute magic archer. She radiated an air of calm authority, but had a very kind heart.
Adam Crench was a loud, boastful, red-haired spear augmenter who loved to tease his friends and speak his mind. Angela Rose was a cheerful, bubbly wind attribute conjurer who had instantly fallen in love with Arthur's cute face. Durden Walker was a massive, towering giant of a man who looked highly intimidating, but was actually a gentle earth element conjurer with a warm, friendly smile. And finally, there was Jasmine Flamesworth. She was a quiet, red-haired young woman who stood silently in the background, observing. She was a wind attribute augmenter who fought using dual daggers. She gave Arthur a quiet, steady gaze, acknowledging him silently. Once the warm reunions and introductions were finished, the group began loading their heavy luggage onto the carriages. The Twin Horns split up to manage the cargo, using 2 carriages to carry all their supplies, backpacks, and food for the long journey. Arthur, his mother Alice, Angela, and Jasmine rode in the first carriage, while Reynolds, Durden, Adam, and Helen managed the second one, guiding the powerful mana beasts that pulled them. With a loud crack of the reins, the carriages began to move. The wooden wheels rolled along the dirt path, leaving their rebuilt home behind. Looking out the window at the disappearing valley, Arthur felt a mixture of nostalgia and thrilling anticipation. His new life was finally moving forward. This was the official beginning of his grand journey. As the travelers paused to rest along the winding mountain road, the light-hearted atmosphere quickly turned into a stage for an unexpected challenge. Adam Crunch, always eager for a bit of excitement and play, proposed a friendly sparring match with the young Arthur. To the seasoned adventurers, the idea of a grown warrior squaring off against a 4-year-old child seemed like a joke. But Reynolds knew his son was no ordinary toddler, and with a confident grin, he allowed the match to proceed. For weapons, Adam picked up a simple wooden stick to act as his spear, while Arthur was handed a small, child-sized wooden practice sword. Adam wore a playful smirk, fully expecting to easily block whatever clumsy swings the toddler threw his way. He gestured for the boy to make the first move, treating the duel as nothing more than a game. But the moment Arthur took his stance, the atmosphere shifted. Arthur didn't move like a child. His posture was balanced, focused, and completely steady. Channeling mana through his legs, Arthur burst forward with incredible speed. He utilized the advanced, deceptive footwork from his past life, executing quick feints that completely blurred his movements. Adam's smirk vanished as he realized the kid was moving with the precision of a trained martial artist. Arthur aimed a swift, diagonal strike, meant to bypass Adam's guard and strike his ribs. However, the physical limitations of Arthur's young, short limbs betrayed his calculations. Instead of hitting the ribs, his strike landed lower, clipping Adam's ankle and momentarily throwing the grown warrior off balance. Surprised, but displaying the quick reflexes of an elite adventurer, Adam recovered instantly. He dropped into a full split to avoid falling, and immediately swung a sweeping leg kick toward Arthur's feet. Arthur reacted instinctively, jumping high into the air to evade the sweep. But while he was airborne, Adam capitalized on his vulnerability, thrusting his wooden stick forward in a lightning-fast strike. With no ground beneath him to dodge, Arthur had to think fast. Rather than trying a standard parry that his small wooden sword couldn't support, he twisted his body and blocked the incoming blow using the pommel of his hilt. The force of the impact was immense. The blow launched Arthur backward, sending him sliding across the dirt. Yet,
Thanks to the full-body mana reinforcement he had maintained throughout the clash, Arthur landed on his feet, completely unhurt and only slightly dazed. The onlookers stood in absolute silence, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Even Jasmine, who rarely spoke, stepped forward, deeply intrigued by the sophisticated footwork Arthur had used. Arthur quickly realized he had shown too much of his past life's combat experience. He put on an innocent baby face, claiming he had simply copied the movements from the library books he read and from watching his father train. Though some remained highly skeptical that a toddler could learn such advanced techniques just from books, the brief match earned Arthur the genuine respect of the entire Twin Horns party. The peaceful, rhythmic sound of wooden wheels rolling against dirt soon faded as the carriages entered a narrow, treacherous mountain pass. Thick, heavy fog rolled in from the deep canyon on their left, severely limiting their vision. The atmosphere grew tense, and the silence of the wilderness suddenly felt heavy and suffocating. Without warning, a sharp whistling sound sliced through the quiet air. Before anyone could react, a black feathered arrow plunged directly into Helen Shard's right calf. The experienced leader of the Twin Horns gasped in pain, her face turning pale as she collapsed to one knee, clutching her leg. Instantly, the quiet mountain path erupted into chaos. From behind the thick rocks and dense trees, dozens of armed men emerged, blocking the road both in front of and behind the carriages. On the steep cliffside to the right, a line of archers stood with bows fully drawn, aiming directly down at the trapped travelers. The cliff fell off into a bottomless, foggy abyss on the left. There was no way to run. They were completely surrounded. A massive, intimidating man stepped forward from the crowd of bandits, with a bear-like frame and deep, ugly scars running across his face. Rested on his broad shoulder was a colossal battle axe. He looked at the travelers with a cruel, toothless smirk, his eyes full of greed. With a gruff, raspy voice, he barked an order to his men, telling them to kill all the men, but to leave the women and the young boy alive. He warned them not to damage the captives, as they would sell for much less on the slave market. Hearing his mother and his family referred to as mere cargo made Arthur's blood run cold. A dark, terrifying anger surged deep within him, a wrath he hadn't felt since his days as a king. His eyes darkened, and his tiny hands clenched into tight fists. In his past life, he had executed countless criminals and tyrants who preyed on the weak, and he despised slavers more than anything. For a split second, he was ready to leap forward and tear the brute apart himself. But he quickly forced his breathing to slow down, reminding himself that he was currently in the fragile, limited body of a 4-year-old. He had to be smart. Beside him, Reynolds Leywin instantly shed his goofy, gentle father persona. He stepped forward, his eyes burning with intense determination and the sharp wisdom of a seasoned adventurer. Arthur closely watched the enemies, analyzing their strength. He looked for the faint, swirling ripples of mana around their bodies. He realized that among the 30 or so bandits, only 4 of them possessed mana, and none of them seemed to be ranged conjurers. The rest of the attackers were just normal, non-magical thugs. Reynolds came to the same conclusion. His voice boomed across the mountain pass as he slipped on his heavy, metallic combat gauntlets. He ordered his party to protect the family, shouting the command for their defensive line. "Safeguard formation!" The Twin Horns moved instantly, drawing their weapons and forming a protective wall around Alice and Arthur, ready to fight for their lives. The defensive formation held tight as the chaotic battlefield erupted around the carriages. The bandits charged from all sides, but the Twin Horns were seasoned veterans who had fought together for years, and their coordination was absolute. Durden Walker, the massive earth conjurer, was the first to strike. He slammed his heavy staff onto the ground, channeling his mana deep into the soil.
With a deep rumble, a massive wall of earth and stone erupted from the dirt, standing several meters high. The thick stone barrier blocked the direct line of sight of the bandit archers on the cliffs above, protecting Alice, Arthur, and the carriages from the incoming rain of sharp arrows.
From behind the safety of the stone wall, Helen Shard took action. Despite the painful arrow still sticking out of her calf, her focus was unshakable. She drew her signature bow, nocking an arrow and infusing it with glowing wind mana. She closed one eye, concentrating the energy into her vision to track her targets on the cliffs. When she released the string, the wind-infused arrow flew with terrifying force, piercing straight through the armored chest of a bandit archer and pinning him to the ground yards away.
On the ground, the vanguard went on the offensive. Adam Crench, the loud, red-haired spearman, charged directly into the group of incoming bandits. He coated his long spear in a sharp aura of wind mana, thrusting it forward with blinding speed. He moved with fluid grace, keeping multiple opponents at bay and easily slicing through the non-magical thugs who dared to approach. Right beside him, Reynolds Leywin fought with ferocious power. His heavy metallic gauntlets were wrapped in roaring bright orange flames. He threw devastating punches, sending waves of fire that blasted groups of bandits backward, the heat of his strikes warming the cold, foggy pass.
Meanwhile, Jasmine Flamesworth moved like a silent phantom. As a wind attribute augmenter, she channeled her mana to increase her speed to superhuman levels. She slipped past the main clash, appearing behind any bandits who tried to flank the carriages. Her dual daggers moved in silent, precise arcs, taking down enemies before they even realized she was there.
Arthur watched this display from the carriage, deeply impressed by what he was seeing. In his past life, combat was almost entirely about individual strength, one powerful warrior fighting another. But here, he was witnessing true high-level teamwork. He analyzed how the conjurers, who acted as the backline defense and long-range artillery, perfectly complemented the augmenters, who acted as the frontline vanguard. It was a flawless loop of offense and defense where every member covered the other's weaknesses.
However, the tide of the battle quickly shifted. The massive bandit leader stepped forward, dragging his colossal battle axe along the dirt. He was no ordinary thug. He was a powerful earth element augmenter. The giant leader let out a deafening roar, channeling a heavy, dense brown aura of earth mana into his massive muscles and his weapon. He charged forward, completely ignoring the fire blasts and wind arrows. With a monstrous swing, he slammed his giant axe into Durden's protective stone wall. The sheer impact shattered the massive earth barrier into pieces, sending a violent shockwave through the ground that rumbled the entire path and pushed the vanguard back. The brute had broken their defensive line, putting Arthur and Alice in immediate danger.
The sudden destruction of Durden's massive stone wall sent shockwaves of panic through the defensive line. With a victorious roar, the bald bandit leader charged forward, swinging his colossal battle axe with terrifying strength. Reynolds, Leywin, and the vanguard were pushed back by the sheer force of the shockwave, leaving the path to the carriages temporarily exposed. Sensing an opening, a sneaky bandit mage who had been hiding on the higher rocks aimed a lethal spell directly at Alice, who was desperately trying to shelter Arthur near the carriages.
Reynolds looked back, his eyes widening in pure terror. Realizing he was too far away to reach them in time, his voice cracked with raw emotion as he screamed an urgent order to his son. "Arthur, protect your mother! Protect your unborn sibling!" Arthur's heart skipped a beat as the words echoed in his mind. For the first time, he realized his mother was pregnant. He was going to be a big brother.
This revelation ignited a fierce, protective instinct within him. Arthur refused to let this precious new family, the first real family he had ever known, be taken away from him. Moving with the blinding speed of a seasoned warrior, Arthur leaped directly in front of his mother, throwing himself into the path of the oncoming spell.
The bandit mage closed the distance, attempting to capitalize on the chaos. But Arthur was ready. He drew the sharp daggers Jasmine had gifted him, his small hands holding the weapons with absolute grip. In a split second, Arthur lunged forward, driving the blade deep into the bandit mage to stop his assault. The momentum of the clash, combined with the unstable, crumbling terrain at the edge of the road, proved disastrous. The ground beneath their feet gave way. As they slipped off the edge, Arthur did not let go. He clung tightly to the bandit mage, using his weight to drag the enemy down into the deep, foggy abyss along with him. He wanted to make absolutely sure this threat was completely neutralized, ensuring the safety of his mother and his future sibling. The cold wind whistled sharply in Arthur's ears as he plummeted off the cliff, falling deeper and deeper into the bottomless canyon. As the world above faded into the thick gray fog, a strange sense of peace washed over him. He recalled the quiet, mysterious voice of the emissary who had facilitated his reincarnation, remembering how the entity had thanked him before sending his soul to this world. In his past life as King Gray, Arthur had died in complete solitude, surrounded by nothing but cold, empty power. But now, as he fell toward his certain end, he realized he could die happy. He had been given a second chance. He had felt the warmth of a loving family, and he had successfully protected them. Clinging to that promise, Arthur closed his eyes as the darkness of the abyss swallowed him completely. Arthur slowly opened his eyes, expecting to find himself in the quiet dark of the afterlife. He remembered the terrifying fall, the howling wind, and the absolute certainty that his tiny 4-year-old body would be crushed to a paste at the bottom of the deep canyon. Instead, he felt the cold, hard stone of a cave floor beneath him. As Arthur sat on the cold stone floor, he couldn't help but marvel at the incredible magic that had saved his life. A fall from such a height should have been fatal, yet here he was, with only a few minor aches left in his tiny body. He realized that whoever had healed him possessed a level of magical skill far beyond anything he had seen in this world so far. Before he could investigate further, a telepathic voice echoed directly inside his mind. The voice was deep, ancient, and carried a strange, comforting warmth. Trying to remain polite and hide his wariness, Arthur spoke aloud to the empty cave. He called out, asking Mr. Voice if he could trouble him for directions so he could find his way back home. A soft, amused giggle echoed in his head in response. The voice gently corrected him, pointing out that she was definitely not a mister. Arthur was taken aback. He apologized quickly and asked how she knew his name. The voice explained that she had been watching over him for some time and had caught him mid-air as he fell down the canyon. She assured him that his parents and their companions had survived the bandit ambush, though they were currently devastated, believing their young son had perished in the fall. Knowing his family was safe brought an immense wave of relief to Arthur, but his priority was still finding a way back to them. He asked if he could leave the cave and head toward the nearest town. The voice's tone grew serious. She explained that they were currently in a hidden pocket of safety, protected by a powerful ancient barrier that kept out unwanted guests. Outside of this safe zone lay the untamed depths of the Beast Glades, a deadly, unforgiving territory crawling with high-rank mana beasts. For a 4-year-old child, stepping outside the barrier meant certain death.
Arthur realized he had no choice but to wait, recover, and grow stronger before he could attempt the dangerous journey home. He decided it was time to meet his mysterious savior face to face. He stood up and began walking deeper into the cave, following the sound of the telepathic voice. The dark, winding tunnels slowly opened up into a colossal, magnificent chamber. As Arthur stepped into the grand cavern, the shadows parted to reveal a massive, awe-inspiring silhouette waiting for him in the dim light. Arthur took a hesitant step forward, letting his eyes slowly adjust to the dim, glowing light of the colossal chamber. As the deep shadows finally parted, his breath caught in his throat. Standing in the center of the cavern was a creature of absolute majesty. It was a giant, dark figure. Her full figure is covered in darkness, reflecting the soft, magical light of the cave. Having lived his entire past life in a world where this kind of dark figures are called as demons, he is terrified of her appearance. But as she saved his life, Arthur tries to get through that. Seeing her makes him terrified. Arthur felt incredibly small and humbled under her presence. As he looked closer, he noticed something alarming. On the dark figure's side was a deep, glowing purple wound. The injury seemed to pulse with a dark, corrupted energy, slowly draining her strength. Despite the obvious pain she was in, her massive, glowing eyes looked down at him with immense gentleness and profound wisdom. The telepathic voice echoed in Arthur's mind once again, confirming his silent thoughts. As Arthur looks at the big dark figure, he is shocked and afraid. She told Arthur that her name was Sylvia. She did not speak with hostility. Instead, her voice carried the comforting warmth of a loving guardian. Sylvia revealed that she could sense his unique nature. She could tell that his soul was far older, more mature, and more experienced than his 4-year-old body suggested. However, she reassured him that she had no desire to pry into his secrets. She respected his privacy, which instantly made Arthur feel a deep sense of relief. In a world where he had to constantly hide his past life, finding someone who accepted him without question was a rare gift. Arthur felt an unexpected, deep bond forming with the gentle giant. She felt less like a terrifying beast and more like a wise, caring grandmother. Sylvia explained that the wound on her side was the result of a past battle with powerful, dangerous enemies. Because of her condition, she had to remain hidden inside this sanctuary, protected by her ancient barrier. She reiterates that the wilderness outside was far too dangerous for Arthur in his current state. She proposed a plan. Arthur would stay with her in the safety of the cave. During his stay, she would help him train, teaching him how to properly refine and control his newly awakened mana core. Once his body was strong enough to handle the strain, she promised to use her advanced dimensional magic to open a teleportation portal and send him directly back to his family. Arthur's heart swelled with gratitude. He realized this big creature was offering him a path to grow stronger and return to the people he loved. He bowed deeply, showing the utmost respect, and formally introduced himself as Arthur Leywin. Sylvia let out a soft, warm rumble of approval, cementing their new bond as teacher and student. While Arthur's physical body gradually recovered from the immense strain of the fall, he and Sylvia spent several quiet, peaceful days together inside the glowing cavern. To speed up his recovery and regain his motor skills, Arthur began practicing his martial arts and sword movements on the open stone floor. It was a highly amusing sight. He was a legendary king mentally, but he was executing these complex, deadly combat drills in a tiny, chubby 4-year-old body. Sylvia lay resting nearby, quietly watching his precise movements with highly amused, intelligent eyes. When Arthur grew hungry after his workouts, he tried to reach some exotic glowing fruits hanging high up on the cavern walls. Because he was simply too short to reach them, Sylvia would gently extend her massive, pearlescent tail, pluck the fruits, and place them directly in front of him. As the days turned into weeks, their bond grew deeper. Sylvia acted like a doting, protective mother. She would gently scold him whenever he overexerted his fragile body during training, making sure he rested and ate enough. This maternal warmth touched Arthur deeply. In his past life, he had never known the gentle touch of a mother or the safety of a true guardian. Sylvia's presence was filling a lonely void inside him that he had carried for 2 lifetimes. While Arthur trained, Sylvia quietly worked on her side of their agreement. Every day she gathered her ambient mana and meticulously began constructing the complex teleportation portal that would carry Arthur back home. The process was incredibly slow and taxing, especially with the pulsing, corrupted purple wound on her chest, but she pushed through the pain to ensure his safe return. One afternoon, while taking a break from his training, Arthur's thoughts drifted back to the bandit ambush. He remembered the cruel, bald leader who had threatened his family and referred to them as cargo. A dark, suffocating wave of pure anger surged around Arthur, and his small fists clenched tightly. Sylvia instantly noticed the dark shift in his mana. She telepathically spoke to him, her voice filled with gentle concern. She warned him that holding on to such toxic, burning hatred would only consume his heart and swallow him whole. She reminded him that if he lived only for revenge and the destruction of his enemies, this second life would be no different from his empty past. Arthur looked at the giant, wise, dark figure and let out a soft breath. He realized she was completely right. He relaxed his hands, letting the dark energy fade away. He resolved to focus his heart not on hating his enemies, but on loving and protecting the family he had left behind. Sitting close to Sylvia under the soft light of the cavern, Arthur felt a deep sense of peace, grateful for the good company of the gentle beast. 2 months flew by inside the safe sanctuary of the cave. During this time, Arthur and Sylvia grew closer than ever. To Arthur, the giant figure was no longer just a powerful, magical beast. She had become his beloved grandmother, and she treated him like her own flesh and blood. Arthur proudly showed her his progress with a technique he named mana rotation, which allowed him to absorb mana even while moving. Sylvia watched him with a warm, proud smile, glad to see her student growing stronger. However, the peaceful days came to a sudden, terrifying end. Arthur noticed Sylvia looking unusually pale and weak. Before he could ask her what was wrong, the entire cavern began to shake violently. The soft, glowing blue light of the cave started to crack, and the air turned freezing cold. Sylvia's gentle eyes instantly filled with panic. Telepathically, she told Arthur that her ancient defensive barrier had been shattered. Her enemies had finally tracked her location and breached her sanctuary. As at that point, Sylvia revealed her true form. It was a giant, white-scaled dragon. Her scales shimmered like pearls, reflecting the soft, magical light of the cave. Having lived his entire past life in a world where dragons were nothing more than myths and legends, seeing one standing alive right in front of him was a massive shock. Arthur felt incredibly small and humbled under her presence. Knowing she was too weak to fight them off, Sylvia acted with absolute urgency. She pulled out a beautiful glowing stone that shimmered with rainbow colors. She handed it to Arthur, explaining that this was not a rock, but the egg of her unborn child. She pleaded with him to protect her baby, trusting him with the most precious thing in her life. Before Arthur could process this, Sylvia placed her massive claw directly over his chest. A blinding golden light erupted between them. In an incredibly painful rush, she began transferring her beast will, the legendary magic and legacy of a dragon, directly into Arthur's mana core. Arthur screamed in agony as the immense power surged through his tiny body. Through the pain, Sylvia's telepathic voice urged him to be strong. She begged him not to seek revenge for her, but to use this power only to live a happy life and protect his loved ones.
Suddenly, a massive explosion tore through the cavern wall. Giant rocks crumbled, and a thick cloud of dust filled the air. Out of the smoke stepped a terrifying figure. It was a dark, horn-clad humanoid enveloped in a suffocating pitch-black fire. The sheer evil pressure radiating from the intruder made it hard to breathe. Sylvia instantly unfurled her massive white wings, stepping forward to shield Arthur from the enemy. She used the last bit of her energy to activate the dimensional portal, which opened as a swirling vortex of light right behind Arthur. Without hesitation, Sylvia used her magic to push Arthur backward into the portal. Arthur reached out his small hand, desperately crying out for his grandmother, begging her to come with him. But Sylvia only looked back at him with a gentle, loving smile. Her final words echoed softly in his mind. "Thank you, my child." As the portal dragged Arthur into the swirling void of space, the connection snapped. The last thing he saw before being swallowed by darkness was the majestic white dragon being engulfed by the enemy's black flames. Screaming in pure, heartbreaking grief, Arthur was pulled away, leaving his beloved grandmother behind as the portal closed forever. The violent journey through the dimensional rift ended in a sudden, brutal crash. Arthur was thrown out of the swirling vortex, tumbling headfirst through the air before slamming hard into a dense bed of leaves and dirt. He rolled down a steep, muddy slope, his small body battered and bruised, until he finally came to a stop. Arthur lay still on the damp ground, completely overwhelmed. He curled up into a ball and let out a heartbreaking sob. The physical pain was nothing compared to the agonizing grief tearing through his heart. Sylvia, the gentle giant who had become his grandmother and protector, was gone. He wept bitterly, pounding his tiny fists into the dirt in absolute frustration and helplessness. After his tears finally began to dry, Arthur remembered the precious gift Sylvia had trusted him with. He anxiously reached into his robes and was relieved to find the rainbow-colored, stone-like egg completely unharmed. As he held the egg close, Arthur felt a strange, warm pulsation deep inside his chest. He closed his eyes and focused on his mana core, discovering that Sylvia had left a hidden, glowing message sealed within his magic. Her soft, comforting voice echoed in his mind one last time. In the message, Sylvia revealed a shocking truth. She had known about his past life as King Grey from the very moment they met. However, she told him his past did not change her feelings. To her, he was never a cold king. He was simply Arthur, her beloved and precious grandson. She explained that she had gifted him her dragon's beast will to keep him safe and help him grow. Finally, she pleaded with him not to let hatred or a desire for revenge consume his future. She urged him to live happily, protect his loved ones, and walk the road ahead with a peaceful heart. Hearing her final words gave Arthur the strength to stand. The sorrow was still heavy, but his eyes were now filled with determination. He carefully tucked the egg into his pouch, swearing to protect it with his life. Looking around, Arthur noticed that his surroundings were completely unfamiliar. The trees were massive, stretching high into the sky, and a thick, heavy white fog clung to the forest floor. He quickly realized he had been teleported deep into the Elshire forest, the
the mysterious and secluded homeland of the elves. Determined to find his way back to his human family, Arthur began navigating through the dense mist. Thanks to his newly acquired beast will, his senses were sharper than ever. Suddenly, his ears picked up the sound of heavy footsteps and rough, mocking laughter. Moving silently like a shadow, Arthur sneaked through the thick underbrush and peeked through the leaves. Just ahead of him was a camp of rough, dangerous-looking men. They were packing up a heavily reinforced wooden carriage. Arthur's blood ran cold as he realized they were slave traders.
One of the men was carrying a small, terrified girl with beautiful silver blonde hair and distinct, pointed ears. She was an elven child. The traders were laughing loudly, boasting about the massive fortune she would bring them in the human slave markets. Seeing the innocent girl in danger, Arthur felt a controlled surge of anger. He remembered Sylvia's message about protecting those in need. He knew he could not walk away and leave this girl to a terrible fate. Quietly drawing in his mana, Arthur prepared to strike. Crouched silently in the thick bushes, Arthur watched the 4 slave traders with a cold, calculating gaze. He knew that despite his advanced mind and kingly combat experience, his physical body was still that of a 4-year-old child. A direct head-on fight against 4 armed grown men would be incredibly foolish. If he wanted to rescue the elf girl, he had to rely on strategy, stealth, and his newly acquired magical abilities. Arthur decided to wait until nightfall, using the cover of darkness and the thick, swirling fog to his advantage. As he observed the camp, he noticed a pack of wild forest beasts resting nearby. Grabbing a heavy stone, Arthur hurled it precisely toward the beasts. The startled creatures began to growl and rustle the bushes, creating a loud distraction. Hearing the commotion, the camp went on high alert. The leader commanded one of the guards to go investigate the noise. This was the perfect opportunity Arthur had been waiting for. Slipping through the shadows as silently as a ghost, Arthur followed the guard into the dark woods. Before the man could realize he was being followed, Arthur leaped from the darkness and delivered a swift, mana-infused strike to his neck, instantly knocking him out of the fight. Without wasting a single second, Arthur turned his attention back to the camp. He snuck up on the second guard, who was standing watch alone. With a sudden burst of speed, Arthur neutralized him before the man could even open his mouth to raise the alarm. Now, only the leader and one remaining trader were left near the carriage. Sensing that his comrades had been gone too long, the leader began to panic. Knowing his cover was blown, Arthur confidently stepped out of the thick fog and into the light of the camp. The 2 remaining slavers gasped, but their shock quickly turned into arrogant laughter when they saw that their mysterious attacker was just a tiny, lost toddler. Their laughter did not last long. Arthur focused his mana, augmenting his speed and physical power to their absolute limits. The trader rushed Arthur with a heavy sword, but Arthur easily dodged the sloppy swing, sliding right under the man's guard. With a powerful mana-charged punch, Arthur struck a vital spot, sending the trader crashing to the ground, unconscious. The leader, now trembling with pure terror, swung his weapon wildly. But to Arthur, the man's movements were painfully slow. Arthur easily sidestepped the frantic attacks, closed the distance, and delivered a final, decisive blow that took the leader down for good. As the quiet silence of the forest returned, Arthur wiped the sweat from his forehead and walked over to the wooden carriage. Inside, the young elven girl was curled up in a tight ball, shivering and crying in absolute terror. Arthur gently opened the carriage door. He reached out his small hand toward her and gave her a warm, reassuring smile, speaking softly to let her know that the bad men were gone and she was finally safe. The elf princess slowly looked up, her tear-filled eyes widening in awe as she stared at her young savior, signaling the start of a legendary bond between them. With the immediate threat of the slave traders eliminated, Arthur knew they could not stay near the camp for long. Other bandits or dangerous beasts could easily be drawn to the area by the sound of the previous struggle. Acting quickly, Arthur began to scavenge the camp for useful items. Although he felt a bit hesitant about looting, his practical survival instincts took over. He packed dry food rations, water skins, and a compact travel tent into a sturdy leather rucksack left behind by the traders. Once his bag was packed, Arthur turned back to the young elven girl. She was still shivering slightly, her eyes wide with lingering shock, but the fear in her gaze had completely vanished, replaced by an immense sense of gratitude. Gently taking her hand, Arthur guided her out of the cage and away from the camp, stepping together into the deep, misty woods of Elshire. As they walked, the heavy silence between them began to soften. To help ease her mind, Arthur broke the ice. The young girl shyly revealed that her name was Tessia Aerolith. In return, Arthur introduced himself simply as Arthur. As they continued their long trek, Tessia kept stealing glances at him in quiet wonder. Even though he looked like a small, fragile toddler, he walked with steady confidence and spoke with a level of calm maturity that was far beyond his physical age. Navigating the Elshire forest was no easy task. A thick, magical mist clung to the forest floor, a natural defense mechanism designed to keep human outsiders permanently lost. Fortunately, Tessia's elven heritage gave her sharp natural senses, while Arthur's newly awakened mana core and Sylvia's beast will allowed him to sense the flow of nature and stay on the right path. By the time night fell, the forest air turned freezing cold. Arthur decided it was time to stop and rest. He cleared a flat spot on the ground, started a small campfire, and set up the scavenged travel tent. Once the shelter was ready, Arthur told Tessia to go sleep inside the tent where it was warm. He explained that he would sit outside by the fire to keep guard and ensure their safety. Hearing this, Tessia's cheeks flushed a bright red. She hesitated, fidgeting with her hands, before shyly whispering that she did not mind sharing the tent with him. She clearly did not want her young savior to freeze outside in the dark. Arthur gently declined, offering her a reassuring smile. He told her he was not very sleepy and insisted that someone needed to stay awake to keep watch for nocturnal predators. Tessia's elven ears drooped slightly in disappointment, but she obediently crawled inside the tent. Sitting alone under the dark canopy of the forest, Arthur leaned against the massive trunk of a tree and closed his eyes. He began to meditate, focusing his consciousness deep within his chest. He wanted to inspect the powerful gift Sylvia had left behind. As his mind examined his mana core, he noticed faint, glowing foreign runes etched onto its surface, the mystical mark of the dragon's beast will. Suddenly, the tent flap rustled. Tessia peeked her head out, looking highly embarrassed. Trying to sound completely logical, she claimed that if a wild beast were to appear, it would definitely attack Arthur, because he looked like a small, defenseless child. She argued that for his own safety, he absolutely had to sleep inside the tent. Arthur found her proud, cute excuse highly amusing, but he did not argue. Smiling to himself, he stood up and crawled inside the cozy tent. Lying side by side in the dark, the two children began to talk. Arthur asked her about her life, and Tessia happily described the beautiful forest kingdom of Eleanor. She spoke of how elven children attended school to learn reading, writing, and history, and how they would train under powerful masters once they awakened their magic. Listening to her soft, cheerful voice, Arthur felt a comforting warmth he had not experienced in a very long time.
Surrounded by the quiet whispers of the ancient forest, the two young companions finally drifted off to sleep, their growing friendship providing a peaceful sanctuary in the wild. The morning sun began to pierce through the thick canopy of the Elshire forest, signaling the start of a brand new day. Inside the cozy travel tent, Arthur was the first to wake. Once Tessia woke up, they worked together to pack up their small campsite. They neatly folded the tent, extinguished the remaining embers of the campfire, and packed their gear back into the sturdy leather rucksack. With their supplies secured, they set off once again, stepping into the damp, cool mist of the forest. As they walked, the tension that had once existed between them completely melted away. They were no longer just a rescuer and a victim. They had officially become close friends. Their conversations grew incredibly natural, filled with playful banter and lighthearted teasing. Arthur could not help but make a sarcastic joke, which immediately made Tessia puff up her cheeks in a dramatic pout. Suddenly, Tessia stopped dead in her tracks, her playful demeanor instantly vanishing. Her sharp eyes were locked onto the massive trunk of a twisting tree nearby. Arthur paused beside her, watching curiously as she stepped closer to the bark. She pointed toward a faint, intricately carved runic marking hidden beneath the moss. Tessia gasped in pure excitement, her face lighting up with hope. She telepathically and verbally explained that these runes were secret navigation markers carved by elven scouts. They were designed to guide lost elves safely through the heavy, illusion-inducing mist that guarded their borders from human trespassers. With a clear path now laid out before them, Tessia eagerly led the way, following the hidden trail from one marked tree to the next. Arthur followed closely behind, his enhanced senses keeping him alert to any potential threats. After navigating past several more giant, ancient trees, the dense white fog began to thin. Pushing through a final thick layer of leaves, the two children stopped, completely awestruck by the sight before them. Standing majestically in a clearing was a colossal natural gateway. It was formed by two massive ancient trees that had grown and intertwined their thick branches to create a perfect, towering archway. The air around the structure hummed with a deep, pulsing magical energy. Spanning across the center of the archway was a shimmering, translucent barrier that rippled like liquid glass under the sunlight. Tessia turned to Arthur, her eyes sparkling with joyful tears and a brilliant smile on her face. She pointed toward the glowing barrier and happily announced that they had finally made it. Standing right at the threshold, they gazed upon the majestic entrance to the kingdom of Eleanor, ready to step into a completely new world together. With a loud thud, Arthur falls face first onto the cold stone floor, heavily weighed down by a massive travel pack. A slender hand gently pokes his shoulder as a sweet, cheerful voice announces their arrival. Pushing his messy brown hair out of his eyes, Arthur looks up to see the silver-haired girl Tessia smiling down at him in her dark fur cloak. Arthur stands up and takes a look at his surroundings, and his breath is instantly taken away. Before him lies the legendary elven capital of Eleanor, a breathtaking city built directly inside a colossal cavern. Massive, glowing tree roots wind through the space, supporting elegant suspended platforms, grand stone bridges, and cascading waterfalls that empty into a massive central fountain. The word pristine crosses his mind, but even that simple description does not do this magnificent sight justice. As the two of them begin walking down the stone pathway, the local elves turn to stare, whispering in curiosity at the sight of a human child. Suddenly, a sharp wind whips through the air. With a soft swirl of green light, several elite elven guards dressed in dark armor materialize right in front of them. Without hesitation, they drop to one knee and bow their heads.
"We welcome back the royal princess," they announce in unison. Arthur freezes, his eyes wide with confusion, as he slowly points his finger at the blushing girl beside him. Tessia merely offers a sheepish smile and a gentle nod.
Before Arthur can fully process this, a lavish golden carriage pulls up to the plaza. A distressed elven woman rushes out, crying, "My baby! Tessia, you're okay!" Behind her is the King of Eleanor, Alduin Erelith, and the emotional woman is Queen Muriel. Stepping down from the carriage next is a legendary figure, Virian Erelith, the former king who once led the elves in a brutal war against the humans. Tessia lets go of Arthur's arm and runs into her parents' warm embrace, tears of relief streaming down her face. Watching the family reunion from a distance, Arthur feels a quiet pang of homesickness, wondering if his own mother and father will embrace him the same way when he finally returns home.
King Alduin approaches Arthur, offering his sincere gratitude both as a ruler and as a father. He gently requests that Arthur accompany them to the palace to rest, clean up, and eventually share his side of the story. While the king's words are polite, Arthur catches the sharp, commanding look in his green eyes. He realizes this is not a simple invitation. It is a royal command. Placing a hand over his heart, Arthur bows respectfully and accepts. Before any formalities can continue, Tessia grabs Arthur by the arm, shocking the surrounding guards, and excitedly drags him along to show him the palace. The royal residence is a grand castle carved directly into the sheer cliffside. As they step through the golden entrance, rows of maids stand on either side of a sweeping double staircase, bowing in unison. Arthur cannot help but sweat drop, finding the incredibly dramatic welcome a bit too corny, as if he has stepped straight into a fantasy novel. The queen instructs the maids to take Arthur to a room so he can wash up and rest, but Arthur steps forward. He insists on explaining what happened first.
They gather in a grand meeting hall where Arthur sits alone at one end of a massive wooden table facing the elven royal family and their guards. Standing up, Arthur bows deeply and introduces himself formally as Arthur Leywin from a humble town in the Sapin Kingdom. He deliberately uses a mature, respectful tone, knowing that the conversation will lead nowhere if they view him as a simple, helpless child. King Alduin is visibly impressed by the boy's articulate manner and agrees to hear his tale. Arthur begins his explanation, telling a carefully prepared half-truth. He explains that he was separated from his family after their carriage was ambushed by bandits. But as his story progresses to the moment he crossed paths with their daughter, the atmosphere in the room completely changes.
Hearing of his daughter's capture, King Alduin's face contorts with rage. He slams his fist onto the table, cracking the wood as he snarls, "Slave traders! I should have known it was humans!" Arthur remains entirely calm. He looks directly at the king and says, "Without disrespect, slave trading is a profession, not a race, King Alduin." The defensive remark outrages the royal guards. Instantly, swords fly from their sheaths, and the cold, sharp edges of their blades are pressed directly against Arthur's neck. One of the guards barks, demanding to know how a human child dares to speak such lies. Before the guards can act further, the old King Virian releases a terrifying, oppressive aura, his eye glowing a dangerous red. The overwhelming pressure instantly causes the guards to break out in a cold sweat as they realize they have crossed a serious line. Undeterred by the swords at his throat, Arthur calmly places his hands on the table and leans forward. He states that, regardless of whether they believe his words, the fact remains that Princess Tessia has been returned safely. He quietly adds that his only wish now is to return home to his family in Sapin. Virion, leaning back in his chair, eyes the young boy skeptically,
He asks how a mere child could have possibly saved his granddaughter from a group of armed slave traders. Did he beg them for mercy or attempt to negotiate? Arthur looks the legendary warrior dead in the eye, his expression completely serious and unwavering. "No, Elder Virion," Arthur replies firmly. "While I am a child, I am also a mage. I eliminated the slave traders and rescued your granddaughter."
Arthur stands firmly before the elven royalty, his expression calm and serious. He speaks with a maturity far beyond his years, declaring that regardless of whether anyone believes him, Princess Tessia has been returned safely. He explains that his only wish now is to return to his family in the kingdom of Soppen. This sudden announcement shocks everyone in the room. Tessia gasps in disbelief, devastated that her savior wants to leave so soon. Even her parents, the king and queen, look completely taken aback. Arthur rubs the back of his head and gently explains his reasoning. Knowing the tense history between humans and elves, he knows it is not safe or appropriate for a human to stay in their kingdom for too long. More than anything, his family thinks he is dead, and his absolute priority is to let them know he is alive and safe. The Elven King, Alduin, listens intently. He places a hand on his chin, deeply reflecting on the boy's words. He agrees that regardless of the past conflicts between their kingdoms, Arthur saved his daughter and brought her all the way home, which deserves a grand reward. However, the king reveals a major obstacle. The teleportation gate connecting their kingdom to Sapin is highly restricted. It only opens once every 7 years during a summit conference between the three races. Unfortunately, the next opening is still 5 years away. Seeing Arthur's disappointment, the king offers an alternative. He promises to gather a highly skilled group of royal guards to escort Arthur back home safely on foot. He also extends his hospitality for the night, warning Arthur that while some elves are tolerant, many still hold bitter grudges against humans because of the ancient war. He advises Arthur to make himself at home and rest, promising the escorts will be ready by the next morning. Arthur bows politely, thanking the king for his kindness. Later, Arthur is shown to an incredibly luxurious guest room. The walls sparkle, and the furniture is fit for royalty. Exhausted from his long, grueling journey, Arthur steps into a massive waterfall shower to wash away the dirt and fatigue. But as the warm water pours over him, a sudden sharp pain spikes through his body. He grips his chest, realizing with dread that his physical condition is rapidly getting worse. After wrapping his injuries, Arthur sits on a large plush couch. In his hands, he cradles a glowing, bandaged egg. He looks at it sadly, whispering that he doesn't know what to do and wishes Sylvia were here to help him. Suddenly, a loud, aggressive knock startles him from his thoughts. Arthur opens the door, only to find Tessia standing there. Her face is completely red, and she is puffing her cheeks in pure anger. Before Arthur can say a word, she lunges forward and tackles him straight to the ground with a loud crash. Tessia stays on top of him, tearfully calling him a dummy. She angrily accuses him of acting cold to her family and trying to run away so quickly. Arthur, completely bewildered, tries to defend himself. He explains he wasn't being cold. He was just trying to show respect because her parents are the literal king and queen of the entire kingdom. He looks at her with an annoyed expression, asking why she never bothered to tell him she was a princess. Tessia playfully sticks out her tongue and winks, trying to brush it off. But her playful mood quickly fades back into sadness. She looks down, shivering slightly, and confesses that Arthur is the very first friend she has ever had, and she simply does not want him to go. Seeing her tears, Arthur's expression softens. A warm, gentle smile spreads across his face. He calls her a crybaby princess and affectionately tells her to show him around the castle. Tessia's eyes light up, and she happily leads him outside under a starry night sky. They walk onto a beautiful stone bridge suspended high in the air under a starry night sky.
She eagerly explains that this balcony is her favorite place in the entire castle. She tells him that if he stayed until spring, he would see the entire area filled with beautiful blooming flowers. Even though it is winter, she points down toward the dark gardens, noting that he can still see the magical glow bees harvesting light. Tessia kneels down and gently catches a glowing golden orb of light in her hands. She turns to Arthur with a brilliant, joyful smile, asking if it's pretty. Arthur stares at her, genuinely captivated by the beautiful sight. She reaches out, gently handing the glowing light over to him.
Suddenly, a sharp whistling sound cuts through the quiet night air. Arthur's battle instincts instantly flare. In a split second, he pulls Tessia behind him to safety and reaches out, catching a fast-moving projectile right out of the air. Without hesitation, Arthur dashes forward in a blur, aiming a counterattack at the dark figure hiding in the shadows. With a heavy thud, Arthur's strike is blocked by a powerful hand. Arthur glares up, only to see Tessia's grandfather, the former Elven King, smiling down at him playfully. Shocked and angry, Arthur demands to know what is wrong with him, asking if he just tried to kill his own granddaughter. The old man chuckles, squatting down to Arthur's level. He points out that the projectile Arthur caught was actually just a harmless, blunt wooden toy that would have only left a small bump. Arthur looks down at his hand and realizes he was completely tricked.
Still, the old man praises Arthur, admitting he has incredible reactions and instincts. He notes that while Arthur's mana usage is mediocre at best, he can now see how a mere child managed to defeat dangerous slave traders. Arthur can only sweat drop, silently thinking that this old man must have a screw loose. Tessia quickly steps between them, angrily yelling at her grandfather to stop teasing her friend. But the playful look on the old man's face instantly vanishes. His eyes turn incredibly sharp and serious as he looks at Arthur. He tells him he didn't come here to tease. Arthur feels a heavy, suffocating pressure wash over him, making him sweat in fear. He wonders what this powerful warrior wants with him. The old man smiles a knowing, intense smile, stating it has been a long time since he has met someone so interesting. He tosses a wooden practice sword directly at Arthur. As Arthur catches it, the old king challenges him, eager to see what the young boy is truly made of. Arthur firmly catches the wooden training sword thrown to him, his gaze locking onto his opponent with absolute focus. He quickly drops into a battle stance, his dark training robes rustling as he steps forward. With a swift, fluid motion, he sweeps his wooden sword through the air, launching a direct attack. Arthur charges forward, aiming a fast slash at the former Elven King, Virion. Yet Virion remains incredibly relaxed, casually crouching on a low seat and easily dodging the incoming strike with minimal effort. Watching the intense sudden clash from the sidelines, Tessia gasps in shock, crying out for her grandfather to stop. But Virion is just getting started. Suddenly, a powerful, swirling blue aura erupts from the old man's body. He stands up slowly, completely enveloped in a blazing shroud of blue mana. Looking at Arthur with a smug, playful grin, he mutters that the young boy is a scary little brat. Arthur does not back down. Sensing the immense pressure, he gathers his own mana, channeling a fierce wind around his body and his wooden sword. He braces himself and dashes forward again, unleashing a rapid downward slash. But Virion is too fast. With a soft rustle of his robes, the old man easily slips to the side, completely evading the attack. Arthur spins gracefully in midair, attempting to catch the old king with a follow-up strike. To his surprise, Virion casually raises his arm, blocking Arthur's sword with a heavy thud. Arthur's eyes widen as he feels the raw, crushing physical strength behind the block. Before he can recover, Virion launches a sweeping kick. Arthur's quick reflexes save him just in time as he leaps high into the air to avoid the sweep. But Virion is already waiting for him.
While Arthur is still airborne and unable to dodge, the old man strikes him with a powerful blow, sending him hurtling backward. Arthur crashes toward the ground, but he manages to slide across the stone floor on his feet and one hand, leaving long white skid marks. He keeps his balance, but the impact forces him to lose his grip, sending his wooden sword clattering several feet away. Refusing to give up, Arthur lunges forward, scraping his hand along the ground to quickly grab his weapon. He leaps straight back into the fray, unleashing a flurry of rapid, crisscrossing slashes. In a brilliant display of orange and blue mana trails, their wooden swords clash repeatedly. Seeking an opening, Arthur flips upside down in midair, attempting a vertical downward strike. But Virian's defenses are flawless. He easily parries the strike. Even though Arthur tries his best to reinforce his body with mana and keep his movements as small and efficient as possible, Virian's counterattacks are simply too fast and heavy. A series of quick, bruising blows get past Arthur's guard, hitting him squarely in the ribs. Arthur grunts in pain, realizing with growing desperation that he simply cannot keep up with the old man's overwhelming speed. Suddenly, Virian's eye flashes with a sharp, menacing red glow, signaling an impending finishing blow. Realizing he is completely cornered, Arthur's battle instincts kick in. He spots a tiny fraction of a second opening. He performs a quick sweep to throw off Virian's balance, taps his hand against the ground, and launches his body high into the air. Spinning his body rapidly, like a human drill, Arthur pushes himself to go faster than ever before. With a blinding swipe, his wooden sword grazes the side of Virian's face. The wooden sword slips from Arthur's hands, stabbing deep into the grass, while Arthur himself loses his footing and tumbles across the lawn, face-planting into the dirt. Tessia runs over immediately, screaming out both of their names in sheer worry. Arthur lies face down in the grass, completely exhausted and bruised. In the background, Virian drops to one knee and starts laughing out loud. Arthur sighs, thinking to himself that he probably deserved this beating for letting himself get too arrogant. Virian touches his forehead, where a small red scratch has appeared, bleeding slightly. He smiles warmly, admitting he is genuinely impressed that a child was actually able to land a hit on him. Furious at her grandfather's recklessness, Tessia marches up and pinches his arm as hard as she can. Virian yelps in pain as she scolds him, telling him he has bullied Arthur enough and should have gone much easier on him. Virian rubs his arm with a chuckle, admitting that if he had gone any easier, Arthur would have been the one bullying him instead. Arthur manages a weak, painful laugh, clutching his sore ribs and politely thanking the old man for the high praise. But suddenly, the playful atmosphere vanishes. Virian's eyes narrow, turning incredibly sharp and serious. He leans down, looking Arthur dead in the eye, and tells him to become his disciple. Shortly after, Tessia wraps several cute heart-shaped band-aids on her grandfather's forehead to treat his scratch. She stands nearby, looking completely confused by the sudden proposal. Arthur looks at the old man with a deeply skeptical face, asking if he is actually serious. He points out that he is a human, questioning if a human is even allowed to stay and train in their elven kingdom. Virian dismisses his worries instantly, declaring that absolutely no one would dare to kick Arthur out while the boy is under his direct protection. He acknowledges that Arthur is already more capable than most children and even many adults, but promises that he can teach Arthur something that even the most powerful mages in the human kingdom of Sapan could never teach him. Arthur quietly declines, explaining that he cannot stay. His parents have no idea if he is dead or alive, and his main priority is to return to them. Virian looks at him knowingly, asking if it would be enough if there was a way for Arthur to see his family and safely send them a message to let them know he is alive. Tessia nods her head eagerly in the background, wanting him to stay. Arthur is completely stunned, but before he can ask how that is possible, Virian turns around and orders the servants to take Tessia away to get washed up and put to bed. Once they are alone, Virion's expression becomes incredibly grave. He admits he is being impatient, but explains it is because of what he sensed during their spar. He asks Arthur directly if he has been experiencing sudden, searing bouts of pain near his mana core, and if those painful episodes have been happening more and more frequently. Arthur's eyes widen in absolute shock, and he quietly asks how the old man could possibly know that. Virion explains that the real problem is not how he knew, but the fact that Arthur has no idea what is causing the pain. He asks Arthur if he has ever heard of a beast will. The term is completely new to Arthur, but hearing it instantly triggers a memory. He thinks back to his final moments with Sylvia, remembering the exact moment her glowing claw tapped him directly over his mana core. Virion explains that mana beasts are categorized by power, ranging from low-class beasts like carriage lizards up to legendary, highly dangerous beasts. Any beast powerful enough to be ranked as an A-class or higher gains a unique, highly coveted ability. They can pass their will, or their core inherent power, down exactly once in their lifetime, either to their offspring or to a person they share a deep, unbreakable bond with. The old king promises he will not pry into how a young human child managed to acquire such a legendary power, but warns Arthur that at his current stage, this beast will is doing far more harm than good. Amazed by the explanation, Arthur asks if Virion possesses a beast will as well. With a confident smile, Virion unleashes his mana. Suddenly, a massive, majestic, blue, wolf-like spirit erupts from his body. He declares that he is indeed a beast tamer, a legendary title given only to those who have fully conquered and tamed the monstrous beast will residing inside them. Turning back to Arthur, the old man's voice softens with deep, fatherly concern. He tells Arthur that trying to travel back to his family right now is a massive, life-threatening risk. He gently taps Arthur's chest, explaining that the pure power from his acquired beast will is simply too potent and volatile for his young, immature body to handle. He warns Arthur that if he does not learn to control and tame this power soon, the massive energy dormant inside his mana core will eventually crack, tear his body apart, and destroy him from the inside out. Arthur stands silent under the starry sky, staring in awe as the giant, glowing white dragon spirit of Sylvia towers over him, slowly fading away into the dark night. Arthur is trapped in a dark, suffocating dream. A heavy, crushing sensation presses down on his body as he falls endlessly into a dark void. Towering over him is a massive, pitch-black shadow monster with glowing green eyes and a terrifying, jagged smile. Arthur wonders if this terrifying creature is a physical form of his deepest worries, his burdens, and the heavy expectations that haunt him even in his sleep. Suddenly, a loud, cheerful voice pierces through the darkness. Tessia lands right on his chest with a heavy thud, telling him to wake up. Arthur groggily rubs his eyes, muttering to the shadow monster to give him 5 more minutes. This makes Tessia pout in absolute fury, her messy gray hair flaring wild like a miniature Medusa as she yells at him. Arthur looks at her messy state and remarks that her hair looks funny, earning a quick retort from her. Smiling brightly, Tessia eagerly asks if it is true that he is staying in the kingdom. Arthur tells her they will know for sure after their trip with her grandfather. When he calls her princess, Tessia reaches out and gives him a sharp pinch on the side, telling him to call her Tess. Arthur laughingly relents. He tells her he needs to shower and get ready, unless she wants to watch, which sends her running out of the room in blushing disgust. After getting dressed in his dark gray training robes, Arthur heads downstairs. On his way, he hears a tense, loud argument. In the courtyard, King Alduin is arguing with the former king, Virion. The king insists that allowing a human to stay in their elven kingdom goes against all of their ancient traditions. But Virion remains completely stubborn. He proudly declares that he has taken a personal liking to Arthur and wants to hear no more complaints. Pointing to the golden royal carriage, Virion notes that his granddaughter clearly approves of the decision as well, as Tessia sits inside nodding her head rapidly. Overriding the king's protests, Virion firmly declares that Arthur will be under his direct guidance, and everyone in the kingdom must know it. Hearing this, Arthur smiles to himself, realizing he can truly trust the old man.
Virion calls out to Arthur, telling him he is late and they need to hurry. Soon, their golden carriage is rolling down a quiet path through a beautiful, lush forest. Inside, Tessia is completely exhausted from waking up so early and quickly falls asleep, resting her head on Arthur's shoulder. Arthur asks his Gramps how much further they have to go. Virion chuckles, teasing Arthur for getting so comfortable. But as he looks at his sleeping granddaughter, the old man's face turns incredibly soft and gentle. He strokes her head and quietly shares her lonely past. Being the only princess of the kingdom, Tessia grew up isolated. Many adults and children pretended to be her friend just to use her, causing her to build a cold, distant wall around herself. But in the short time she has spent with Arthur, she has smiled and laughed more than she has in years. With a sincere, quiet look, Virion thanks Arthur.
Suddenly, the carriage bumps over a rough path, waking Tessia up. Outside, they arrive at a quaint, cozy stone cottage built directly into a grassy hill, surrounded by ancient trees. Arthur wonders what kind of mysterious friend could convince the former king to travel all the way to such a rural area. Virion marches up to the door and kicks it open with a loud thud, shouting for the old witch to come out. A grumpy, gray-haired elven woman named Rinia slams the door back open, yelling that her ears work perfectly. Virion introduces her as a highly unique deviant who can help Arthur. Arthur bows politely, and Rinia ushers them inside her cozy home. Inside, Arthur notices shelves of ancient books and hanging pots. He recalls that deviants are rare mages whose magic exists outside the four basic elements. They sit around a circular wooden table with a large basin of water in the center. Arthur asks if her magic can really help him reach his parents. Rinia smiles and reveals that she is a diviner, a rare mage with the power to see what is hidden. Leaning close to Arthur, her eyes suddenly glow with a hypnotic, shifting rainbow of colors. She reveals that she knows Arthur is special, and that she has seen pieces of both his past and his future.
Rinia tells Arthur to lean forward and focus entirely on the basin of water. Placing a glowing green hand on his head, she instructs him to visualize his parents as clearly as possible. Arthur closes his eyes, focusing deeply. In his mind, he vividly pictures his mother, her glowing auburn hair, her warm complexion, and the thin eyebrows that always knitted together in worry for him. He pictures his father, his bright blue eyes, his goofy smile, and his playful, simple nature that hid the powerful, charismatic fighter he truly was. With his heart pounding, Arthur silently pleads for them to be alive and opens his eyes to look into the glowing, swirling waters of the basin.
Alice gently places a steaming pot of rich beef stew onto the wooden dining table. Reynolds takes a warm spoonful, his face lighting up with genuine delight as he praises her cooking. He asks what the special occasion is, noting how incredible the meal looks. Alice's smile is soft, but it carries a heavy, lingering sadness. She explains there is no special occasion. It has simply been a very long time since she cooked a meal for him, since they moved into the Helsty estate. Before Reynolds can take another bite, a soft, familiar voice suddenly echoes directly inside their minds, saying, "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad." Both of them freeze in absolute shock, their eyes widening in disbelief. The voice whispers once more,
"It's me, your son, Arthur." Reynolds' hand trembles and his spoon clatters onto the table, spilling beef and gravy everywhere, but neither of them pays it any attention. Arthur's voice explains that a highly powerful deviant mage is helping him send this mental message. He wants them to know one simple, beautiful truth: he is alive and safe. As his words wrap around them, the painful memories of the past months flood back. After Arthur fell from the cliff, their world had completely shattered. Alice had screamed in agony, desperately clawing at the earth until her fingers bled, while her friends had to hold her back. Reynolds had been consumed by guilt and grief, falling to his knees on the cold, rainy cliffs, entirely broken. But Arthur's voice gently pulls them out of that dark memory. He tells them he survived the terrible fall, just barely, by defeating the beasts at the bottom of the canyon. He begs them not to blame themselves or each other for what happened. He reveals that he is currently in Eleanor, the hidden kingdom of the elves. He explains that he cannot return home just yet because he is recovering from a unique illness that requires special treatment, though he promises them he is not in any danger. Arthur tells his mother that the elder helping him is a deviant, just like her. He then playfully tells his dad to keep training and practicing his magic, joking that he shouldn't be surprised if Arthur beats him in their next match. Finally, he tells his father to take care of his mother and the new baby on the way. Overwhelmed with a joy they thought they would never feel again, Reynolds and Alice burst into tears. Reynolds leaps out of his chair so quickly it knocks backward onto the wooden floor. He grabs Alice, pulling her into a tight, emotional embrace as they cry and laugh, finally knowing their beloved son is safe. Far away, inside the quiet cottage in the elven forest, the magical connection fades. A single drop of water falls back into the basin, rippling the quiet surface. Arthur slowly looks up from the water. Tears stream down his cheeks, but his eyes are filled with a fierce, unwavering determination. Virion watches him silently, waiting. Arthur takes a deep breath, steeling himself for the grueling training ahead, and says, "I'm ready." Stepping out of the grand palace gates, the elven royal family walks together down the wide stone steps. Tessia runs ahead eagerly, while Arthur stands politely near the side. Suddenly, King Alduin clears his throat and gently taps Arthur on the shoulder. Scratching his neck with a sheepish expression, the king confesses that his years of ruling have made him a bit stubborn and old-fashioned. Muriel joins them, placing a warm hand on Arthur's shoulder. She apologizes for their earlier harshness and warmly tells Arthur to treat the palace as if it were his own home. Alduin smiles and formally welcomes Arthur once again, acknowledging him not only as his daughter's savior, but also as his father's very first disciple. He extends his hand for a warm handshake, which Arthur gladly accepts with a polite smile. Before the serious moment can drag on, Tessia slides right between them, with her arms wide open. She loudly suggests that if they are truly sorry, they should let her take Arthur outside to show him around the cavernous city. A short while later, Tessia is fully dressed in an adorable white dress, a floral sun hat, and a tiny backpack. She eagerly drags a slightly tired Arthur down the grand palace stairs and into the bustling marketplace below. As they navigate the crowded streets, Arthur accidentally bumps into a noble-looking elven boy dressed in fancy blue and gold robes. Arthur quickly apologizes, but the boy reacts with dramatic disgust, brushing off his sleeve and complaining about getting human germs on his clothes. The snobbish boy proudly introduces himself as Faerith Ivesar II, a noble genius. He dismisses Arthur as a mere human commoner and smugly offers to escort Princess Tessia instead. Tessia tries to pull Arthur away, but Arthur finds the boy's cliché villain attitude too hilarious to ignore. Deciding to have some fun, Arthur gasps dramatically and shouts, "The Faerith Ivysaur?" purposely mispronouncing the noble's name like a Pokemon. Faerith is briefly flattered, thinking his fame has reached a human, before realizing what Arthur actually called him. He angrily corrects Arthur, while Tessia holds her stomach, laughing hysterically. Arthur bows mockingly, calling himself a lowly bug and promising to show proper respect, before winking at Tessia as they walk away. Losing his temper completely, Faerith yells for them to stop and points his wooden wand directly at Arthur. For the pride of the Ivysaur family, he dramatically slaps his glove onto the ground, challenging Arthur to a formal duel. Arthur's face blankly registers his utter disbelief. Tessia steps protectively in front of Arthur, fiercely warning Faerith to remember his place before the personal disciple of Elder Virion. However, Faerith refuses to back down, claiming his father taught him never to let anyone trample on his pride. He tells Arthur to accept the challenge or run away like a coward. Arthur silently wonders if duels are a massive deal in this kingdom, but his silence is instantly taken as acceptance by the eager noble boy. A curious crowd of elven children gathers to watch. Tessia lets out a tired sigh, raises her hand, and commands the duel to start. Faerith steps back, dramatically raising his wand and channeling his wind magic. But before the elven boy can even finish his boastful sentence, Arthur vanishes. In a literal blink of an eye, Arthur appears directly in front of Faerith. Before the noble boy can react, a solid punch lands squarely on his cheek. The force of the blow sends Faerith spinning backward through the air, crashing flat on his back while his wand clatters to the ground. The watching crowd gasps in absolute shock. Arthur casually lowers his fist, muttering, "That's it?" Tessia sweat drops, admitting she knew exactly how this would end. Grabbing Arthur's arm, she yells for them to run, and they sprint away laughing happily. As they run through the city, Arthur realizes he is growing to appreciate this bright little princess more and more. They spend the rest of the day exploring the massive elven capital. They quietly read together in the grand library, and when a stubborn merchant refuses to serve Arthur, Tessia fiercely steps in, using her royal authority to defend him. Later, as they walk along a high stone bridge overlooking the breathtaking cavern city, Tessia turns to him with a bright smile, asking if he is nervous about his training starting tomorrow. Arthur looks out over the vast expanse, his mind drifting back to the grim warnings Elder Virion had given him. The old elf had warned him that the training would be agonizing, comparing the beast will assimilation process to submerging his body in boiling tar. He would be completely isolated in a foreign land, far away from the comfort of his family, and even basic daily life would become exhausting. But Virion had also promised that if Arthur could endure the pain, the payoff would be unimaginable. Thinking of his family and how far he has already traveled to get here, Arthur's resolve hardens. He tightly clenches his fist. He looks out at the glowing subterranean city of Eleanor, his eyes shining with a quiet, powerful excitement. He is ready for the pain, the training, and everything the future has in store for him.